Now that you're here at Grief to Growth, I'd like to ask you to do three things. The first thing is to make sure that you like, click notifications, and subscribe to make sure you get updates from my YouTube channel. Also, if you'd like to support me financially, you can support me through my tip jar at grief2growth.com. It's grief, the number 2, growth.com/tip jar. Or look for tip jar at the very top of the page or buy me a coffee at the very bottom of the page, and you can make a small financial contribution. The third thing I'd like to ask is to make sure you share this with a friend through all your social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Thanks for being here. Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth, and I've got with me today Marla Hughes, and Marla has written a book about for children, and we're going to talk about that today. But what I want to do first is introduce her. Marla has worked with children her entire life in a number of different capacities. She worked at the transplant unit of UCSF Hospital in San Francisco, where she taught children about exercise, nutrition, and relaxation. She worked with Dr. Gerald Jampolsky at the Center for Attitudinal Healing, using art and music therapy to help young children who had life-threatening diseases, who had a parent or loved one who was severely ill. Her podcast, Interviews with Innocence, features experts in the fields of science and metaphysics who focus on children and spirituality. Marla is the founder of the Ethiopian Family Fund, and that's ethiopianfamilyfund.org, which is a nonprofit dedicated to developing sustainable education and healthcare for Ethiopian children and their families. And according to Marla, her greatest teachers have been her children. She said she's never experienced a love that deep or that profound. And she recently finished her first children's book, which I mentioned earlier, Love Magic. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, among other things. So with that, I'd like to welcome Marla Hughes.
Oh, Brian, thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you again. And I know we've kind of been down the same path. So it's always an honor to kind of share stories and experiences. And so thanks for having me.
Well, it's good to have you here. So for our listeners that aren't familiar with the story, why is it that you're so interested in working with children specifically?
Well, I've always been very childlike myself, and it just kind of is just the way I am. And children and dogs, that's my that's my passion. So anyway, as you mentioned in my bio, I worked with kids quite a bit in my career, and I just so love their innocence, their wonder at things, their finding awe every day, just living in the present. And a big part of my the reason for also starting this podcast and writing this book, it's not just for children. Well, it is, but it's for all of us. It's also for our inner child to try to live, more present and just remember. So anyway, I'll just start at the very beginning. So I have 3 children and a husband and two labradoodles. And we just had this beautiful, and we still do, beautiful family. The kids were my twins, and then Dean was 1 year older, so it was kind of like we had a little preschool at the house. Mm-hmm. And we just traveled a lot, and we just had such amazing experiences. I mean, sometimes I just think to myself how I'm just so blessed. I just can't believe how just beautiful all of this is. And I know you feel the same way about your family. And a little over 4 years ago, tragically, my 19-year-old son, Dean, transitioned, and it just broke our worlds open, because we were just so close. And even if you aren't close, it breaks your world open.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're all always soulfully close. But as you, I just really didn't know what to do. So I went really down the path of trying to find out where did he go? What happens after, someone transitions? And I always kind of thought I was spiritual, I was a yogi, but now I know that I really wasn't, in the sense of really exploring all the different avenues of spirituality. And a couple of things happened as I was beginning my journey. And one of those was that my girlfriend, who's very clairvoyant, wrote me one night. She called me later to tell me about this, but one night Dean came to her, and she had run into her playroom and written down, channeled what he had said. And even in that letter, he talked about, his life on this his learning on this earthly realm was complete, and that it was time for him to move on. And I have a lot of letters transcribed from her and from some other mediums. But he also, well, I'll just read just really a little bit of what he said, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You and Dad were a cherished and divine gift to me. My soul, however, has a bigger job to do. I was on earth at that time to experience the discording of the love that I lived and the unlove that I saw in the world. And I am here now to bridge these worlds, to bring forth the words, the songs, the quotes, the mantras, the little reminders that lead us back to the childlike state of truth and love. Simply put, I am here in your world and mine to put back into people's minds and hearts so as to allow authentic, loving experiences through playful, joyful ways to drop back into authentic, pure, honest, simply put, love. So as we move forward, Mama, please let me tell you, hear me. I am grateful for you and your loving mothering. And I am here where I'm supposed to be to do my life's plan and purpose. And that is to be a reminder of the pure and simple love. Without it, life has no meaning. Mm. So let's begin our new adventure. Hear my word, hear my songs, hear my voice. Bring it through to those who need it. Be a mother to the world. Only your heart can possibly hold this message and share this love. Do it for me, Mom, please. I love you in only the way you and I would understand. I know you know what that means. I have your heart as you always have mine. I love you, your Tino. So brings tears to my eyes. And so this was just a couple of weeks after everything happened. And I was talking to my girlfriend, and I was telling her about how I'd had a dream about Dean. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, I have something to share with you, but I wanted to make sure it was the right time. And so I'll never forget, I was walking the dogs. I just sat down on the curb and said, please read it to me. And just broke into tears. But it was confusing, because for your listeners who I know a lot have loved ones transition, because all this stuff is so new to you and you want it to be true so badly, but you just don't know what to do with it. So you just hold on tight. And Dean was this just fun loving. I used to say to people, it's just so weird. He's just so happy all the time. Mm. And even with he was just, one of those kids. And so moving forward, I decided to explore a little bit, and just a few of my experiences. My first experience they don't call themselves mediums, but I have a good girlfriend here in Colorado, and she said, I have friends or a couple that help people talk to those who have transitioned. And I was wondering if you might be interested. Mm-hmm. She said, I'm not sure if Dean will come through. She knew Dean very well because we traveled. As you mentioned, I work in Ethiopia, and she had been there with us, and we've done a lot of traveling together. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, yes, absolutely. So it ends up this guy, and I'm not allowed to use his name, but he is this very well-known scientist who worked with Francis Crick and Ed Lewis, who are both co-founders of DNA, and he and his wife had, I think it was a granddaughter who had transitioned, and they went to someone who helped them, who did a mediumship reading for them. And they were just so taken aback by, like, how does this work? How did they do this? And so they decided to start trying. And even though I know some people don't like the idea of using a board, they don't call it a Ouija board, but that's their vessel to get the message through. Mm-hmm. And I was just so impressed because being, from sort of a scientific background, in Western civilization, that's what you want. You want the proof, right?
Right. Yeah.
And knowing that he was this renowned scientist and was, dipping his, not only dipping his toes, they help people, just family and friends or friends of family, family and friends, mm-hmm. and do it out of the kindness of their hearts. And they just brought through these amazing messages. And that's when I said, I've got to really start exploring this. So as I did, I really dove into near-death experiences. I went to the UK for mediumship workshops and physical seances, and just all plant medicine, just all kinds of different things. And I must say that in all my journeys over the 4 years, I now know that for my heart, there is a knowing that, that this life is eternal. And I do consider that such a gift to know that. So I kept getting all these signs for Dean, and I'll tell you a couple of those because it's so important just to be aware and just to, and this is part of being quiet and present. And we had gone to Ethiopia, and it's kind of a long story. I'm not going to get into it, but our children did this. They weren't really theater kids, but this was like a bicultural program that kind of traveled. It was based out of Colorado. And so anyway, we'd go to different countries and work with the school there, and they would put on a show. Mm-hmm. And it was usually folklore about the country. And this was Fire on the Mountain. And Dean was only 11 years old. And they dressed him up like he was Bob Marley. And he sang Three Little Birds, which is, everything's going to be all right. And so about probably 3 or 4 weeks after Dean transitioned, my girlfriend called me, and she didn't know we had gone to Ethiopia because we had kind of gone our separate ways as we were raising kids. And mm-hmm. and she said, it was so weird. Dean came to me last night. Oh, and Dean loved the monkeys in Ethiopia. He was always feeding them, and there were monkeys everywhere. It was a little village called Wando Ganet. And she said he was like swinging from tree to tree, like it was almost like a monkey. Mm-hmm. And he was saying something like, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. And so that was such a huge sign, knowing that she didn't know anything about us going to Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. Another beautiful sign I received was from a medium when she told me that there was something about Jean. And I said, Gean, I really don't know, anything about that, or I know someone named that. And she said, no, it's not. It's like genes, Gene, and chromosomes, and that he's thanking you for bringing him into this life, and so that he could fulfill his purpose. And no one knew this, not even my in-laws or my parents, that we had an irregular amnio with Dean, and we had to make the decision on whether we met with a geneticist. And it wasn't a hard decision for us, but we had to meet with a geneticist and make a decision whether we were going to bring him into this world or not. Mm-hmm. So just millions of them. You've gotten millions of them too. And I know a lot of your guests have talked about signs, and in an interview that we did before, I think I told even more of those if somebody wants to listen to that. But the whole, just the children part of it kept coming back to me in little simple ways. And one day I said to my daughter, I asked her, do you think they grew up, I'm Christian, well, I'm spiritual, but my husband's Jewish, so they had a bar and bat mitzvah, but there was never any, they didn't know anything about, they never talked about the afterlife or death or anything like that, which I think many religions don't. And I said, do you think it would have been a little bit easier? Of course, you still have to grieve, but if you would have just been raised, knowing that life is eternal and having, a caregiver encourage you to talk about your memories as a young child, or because we hear so many young children talking about past lives and about choosing parents. And you look at Ian Stevenson's or University of Virginia, they're just doing all sorts of things, examining these stories from children. And she said, I really think it would have. And I'll never forget that. And that just kind of, finally lit me totally on the fire. So I decided I was going to write a book, and I was going to gather stories like Wayne Dyer. I was going to continue his work because he wrote a beautiful book called Memories of Heaven. And I suggest that people run out and get that. And it's a compilation of stories from parents all over the world telling about what their 2, 3, 4-year-olds have said. And it's all across the board, from, like I said, choosing parents to reincarnation to meeting loved ones in heaven before they come here that they would have never known, and this and that. But I didn't have anybody to my world, and still a big, I don't know about you, Brian, but still my world doesn't encompass people that talk about this kind of stuff, I mean, thank goodness we have each other in our podcast and all the beautiful people we meet. But I really didn't have a circle to even start gathering stories. And so I thought, well, I'll start a podcast. I called Sandra Champlain, and she was kind enough to email me back. I emailed her, and I just started, and I decided I really wanted to focus on celebrating the wisdom that children bring into our lives, and also our inner childlike self, and to open up the door for caretakers and parents to really recognize that we do know this, but we're the leaders in this. Actually, my book, which I'll hold up right here, it is called Love Magic. And this is on my daughter on the front, Carly. She has crazy wild hair, or she did when she was little. And Cosmo, that's our puppy. He's laying on the bed right behind me. And it also is about Pop, my father-in-law, that we were all very close to, that passed. And it's all about signs and synchronicities and rituals and being present. And so anyway, to get back to briefly before I wrote the book, back to my podcast, I just decided that I would begin it. And I was very fortunate to meet Raymond Moody in the very beginning of my podcast, and we became very good friends. And so I've been so honored to interview, a lot of people. And it's interesting because everyone I talk to, there's always something about the importance of children understanding that life is eternal and that there's something bigger in this world. And I truly believe, I have a little list of what ifs, and I truly believe that if parents understood and knew with all their hearts that our souls are eternal, that we live before this earthly existence, and we will continue to live forever after we leave this earthly world. And we're on this earth to learn lessons and be the best we can be. I think of a child losing a pet what if child, sad as they may be, trusted that their pet was going to another world, another dimension, just another beautiful place where there would only be love, peace, and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And they would absolutely be reunited with their pet when the time came. And if heaven was redefined for children, knowing that it was very much like the earthly realm, but once again with love, and that the world would change forever, not just because they would know that their loved ones are not gone. I mean, that it could just be because of that, because that's plenty.
Mm-hmm.
But also, our children are going through so much, and everyone, most people do. There's a lot of, I don't want to talk about trauma, but what goes on in childhood. And I really believe that teaching our children this through rituals, ceremonies, once again, learning about signs and synchronicities, that they develop an inner strength that helps them navigate this world, and they know how to be quiet, they know how to be present. I interviewed one gentleman who had worked a lot in Bali, and he talked about I think they call it a maluka, even though that's what you usually call the tent-like structure in a plant medicine um, retreat. But
Mm-hmm.
this is for the children, and it was just a place for them, and they knew it was the place where you just go in and you're just quiet, and they're basically, meditating, but they're
Mm-hmm.
just being present. And it was one of the most favorite places for the children to go, so that they would learn, just like we have, everything we've learned since our children have transitioned. What a beautiful thing if they learn all of that, not because necessarily they've had a loved one transition, but because it is interweaved into the fabric of their lives.
Yeah.
And I just believe this so strongly. And um, as you know, Peter Panagore, I always go back to, he said on his interview, and many others, that the only question he was asked when he had his profound NDE, the only question he was asked when he was on the other side was, how did you love? How
Mm-hmm.
did you treat others? So that golden rule of how do you treat others? And also within this interweaving of this fabric, which many talk about, as Bruce Grayson talks about, that the golden rule, that it is not just something nice we made up. It really is interweaved into the fabric of the universe. Actually, I think that was, I don't mean to be throwing around names here, but I've just researched a lot. That was Dr. Evan Alexander. And I know you've had all these guys on your podcast, so people know who I'm talking about. Um, and I just envision, just throughout the day, a child getting up and reminding them, or just quietly being present and asking, who did you help today? Who did you love today? How do you think things? But also within that we all struggle, and we all have sad times, and we all have grief, and we all get angry. But how, I was just talking to a friend about this today, how different my life would have been if that would have been woven into my childhood and all of our childhoods. And within that, we as parents, caregivers, people who really want to take this on, it brings us back to our inner child. It helps us become more present, more reminds us to, who did we love today? Who did we take care of today? How were we present today? And once again, I don't want it to sound Pollyanna, because it's not, because this is life. But I just know it would just change the world. And so with that, I decided I was going to write my book. And in the book, it's a little girl named Charlie, and she really misses her pop pop, who has gone to heaven. I use that word. You can use whatever word you like, but I use that word simply because that's what I grew up with, and I actually really like the word. And her grandma helps her to remember when they were dancing in the rain and the smell of waffles and with whipped cream piled on top with strawberries as they sit and close their eyes and remembering, you know, fresh baked this and that and all the different things that Charlie and Pop Pop love to do together. And the mantra of the book is that Pop Pop always told Charlie that when I take my big trip, all you need to do is think of me and I will be there. The most important things in life are not seen with your eyes, but are felt with your heart. Mm. And that's what the book is all about. So, not to spoil it, but anyway, but then Grandma tells Charlie something really exciting, and that's how those on the other side send us signs. And Pop Pop, I know hummingbirds it's a sign for, it seems, a lot of people, but Pop Pop did love hummingbirds. And so she's on her walk one day with Cosmo, and she runs into this, you know, Cosmo starts running after a rabbit, and she loses control, and all of a sudden she falls on her knees, and a big happy tear drops down, and there's a hummingbird there, and she tells Cosmo all about what the hummingbird means. And earlier in the book, Grandma asked her if she believed, and Charlie says, I think so, but Grandma, how does it work? And so as the story goes, and she sees the hummingbird, you know, at the end, she knows it's Pop Pop, and she knows it's a beautiful sign that he'll always be with her, and can hear his whistling as she runs home with Cosmo. So that's what the book's about. And I really want to get it out to, you know, family and friends, of course, but like helping parents heal and but not, once again, not just that, it's for everybody, because we all get signs and synchronicities from the universe all the time. You know that very, very well. Mm-hmm. And so just to open up, you know, the people's hearts and take a little time each day to really think about your inner child and what you can do to help a child in your life remember and you know, do those sorts of things.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful, wonderful, much needed book. You know, there's several things you touched on there that I'd like to explore a little bit more. You know, you talked about, you know, you were raised Christian, I was raised Christian. But in the church, we kind of talk about the afterlife, we talk about heaven, but it's usually
Mm-hmm.
very general terms. We don't talk about, as you said, how does it work and stuff like that. We don't, and it's, so my experience has been a lot of people, they say they believe in that, but they don't really, right? And then when the rubber hits the road, when we lose a loved one, then we run around asking what happened, where did they go? And then we really want to know. As I think about your book, and I'm thinking, I have a niece that was just born a few weeks ago, and I'm thinking, mm-hmm, this would be a great book to give to her mother. But I could see people hesitating and saying, well, I don't want to teach my child to think about death, because in our society, it's a bad thing. We don't want to think about it, you know?
Right.
So that's, I love your idea of like, let's make this a part of life. Let's understand that whole thing.
Yeah. I actually had another interview no, I haven't interviewed her yet. We just had a pre-conversation. Julie Ryan, I don't know if she's been on the show yet, but she was talking about how with a child, just asking them, what do you think that what songs do the flowers sing? Mm-hmm. Or, you know, just questions like that, just for them to start using their imagination and to know, once again, that there's just something bigger and something that we can go to when we're feeling sad. But you know, you need to have the caregiver and the adult be present too, to be with them, to teach them, because that's, you know, that's where they learn from.
Yeah, it's interesting because a few weeks ago you and I had an email exchange, and you talked about the story from the Babylonian Talmud,
Yes,
which
I have it right here.
I had heard from some of my Jewish friends, And so the story, for people that don't know, there's the angel Layla who lays her finger across the lips of a child that's coming into the world, and they forget who they are, where they came from. And as I think about that, I'm like, is that really the way it is? Because I believe that babies, they still remember where they come from. You look at
Yes,
babies, they're looking around the room, we're like, what are they looking at? And children will tell us things, they view the world as a magical place. They come in, they're like, this place is magical. Anything can happen. And then we adults tell them, well, no, that's just your imagination. That's not the way it
exactly.
works. So how do you think that works? Do they come in and they've forgotten, or what do you think happens?
We'll get back to grief to growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.grief2growth.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grief2growth, www.patreon.com/grief2growth to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Oh no. Do you mind if I read that story? Just because it's kind of
Oh,
the
yeah, that'd be
Babylon.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just as more in a childlike sort of. Okay.
sure.
So, and then I'll answer your question. Beautiful teaching that in the Babylonian Talmud. According to this medieval Jewish text, the angel Lila lives in the womb and watches over the embryo until it is time to be born. The angel teaches the unborn child everything there is to know about the mysteries of life and their soul. Layla also places a lighted candle at the head of the unborn infant so they can see from one end of the universe to the other. Then, when the time comes for the child to be born, the angel Layla puts her finger in front of her mouth as if to say, shh, and then presses the child's upper lip so all memories are forgotten. According to the story, the light touch on the child's lip leaves a slight indentation above the lip called a philtrum, which we all have. I think perhaps the angel Lila did not press quite hard enough on some children's lips. And this is why some come into this current life with soul memories. How blessed we are to have these children share their wisdom with us. So I just love the story, the way it was written there. No, I totally agree with you. I believe that children come in and they remember everything. They have most of themselves there and a teeny bit here trying to learn. And, the research shows until 4 or 5 years old that these children, they see spirit, they talk to angels, they have, many have playmates, invisible playmates. And that's another part of all of this that I didn't really address in my book, but I'm writing another book. And what read Wayne Dyer's book, Memories of Heaven, like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And that they do, but we, once again, as caretakers, we need to validate and we need to be curious and we need to ask questions. And his whole book started with his assistant who had a 2-year-old. And she was just, gazing at him, just how miraculous and adorable this little guy was. And she was just asking herself, like, where did he come from? And she looked at this little boy and said, Sammy, where did you come from? And he looked up at 2 years old, opened his arms, and he said, light.
Mm.
And then she asked him something about, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't know exactly. But then he said something else profound, and she ran in and told Wayne Dyer, and he was like, we're going to ask the world what these little kids are saying. So I definitely believe that, and to help them not only remember longer, but celebrate what they do remember, so we can then, as they get older, bring that into their learning as they become more earthly, if you will.
Yeah.
So they still have one foot in and one foot out,
Yeah.
without being, with being able to live fine here. But you know what I'm saying? So I totally agree with you. They're so close to the source. And that's why my podcast is, I say, to celebrate the wisdom of the very young, because they have I mean, they're much more wiser than we are.
Hmm.
They have so much to teach us, but we just need to be quiet and listen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think about my girls. I remember, I think they were about 4 and 7 because they were about 3 years apart. We were sitting at the kitchen table one day, maybe a little younger, and they were talking about being in heaven and choosing us as parents.
I remember hearing you
And
say that.
I never heard. I know they did not get that from us. We had never. My wife and I, the thought had never even crossed our minds. And I remember talking to my sister-in-law after Shayna passed, and I know that the Mormons believe in pre-existence. But
Right.
as a person raised in the church I was raised in, I never heard anything about, pre-existence. Um,
Neither did
which is
I.
something that we're starting to understand now, and I think you and I are on similar paths. It's like science and near-death experiences and mediums and all this stuff is kind of telling us that we don't just start existing when we're born, that we actually pre-exist. And our girls are like, oh yeah, yeah, we remember being in heaven and choosing you guys. And my daughter Shayna always said, I'm not afraid of death. And she was just never afraid. And I'm glad we didn't really drum that out of them, because I think a lot of parents will ignore that, and we just kind of like, we were curious. It's like, so what do you mean? They're like, oh yeah, we chose you.
That's so beautiful. I was having a conversation the other day with a very good friend who's really going down the spiritual path, kind of reawakening. But she was telling me, without telling you what religion it is, but she remembers when she was in second grade and she had to go into this place and talk about all the stuff she had done wrong.
Hmm.
And it broke my heart, because I mean, I wasn't thinking about how I was raised. It was very open, and God was very cool and loving and all of that. Sounds like you were the same. But that she just grew up feeling like she was bad, and
Hmm.
she had done bad things. And even if she didn't have something to tell whomever she was supposed to tell, she made things up, because that's the way the life was. That's the way the world was.
Hmm.
I thought about that for 2 or 3 days. I just couldn't. It Second grade,
Hmm.
it broke my heart.
Yeah.
And that's, and so it's got to change. I mean, we're transforming. Once again, I always go back to, I had to wait till, however old, to know all of this and learn all of this, and use it for my strength and for my soul.
Hmm.
And gosh, if children know that from the very beginning, or are validated in everything we've talked about. And I do think kids, the millennial, you talk to PMH, I do think children are coming into this world much more in touch and curious.
Hmm.
I know my twins, especially my Carly, it's I think they're really coming in, wanting to do it better.
Yeah, there's interesting, because a lot of people say that they're, and I think it is kind of is, because we need that. The world is so messed up that the
I
people that
know.
are kind of volunteering to come in now are really soldiers, really, volunteering to try to help turn things around. Indigo children, I've heard different terms for them, that
Hmm.
these children are coming in, kind of remembering and kind of pushing to change things. But as you mentioned earlier, our Western society, we're all about scientific, and I use air quotes for that, because science can only measure
Exactly.
certain things, and science is closed to so many things. But we want to know about scientific proof, and we think that people that are religious or are spiritual, they're silly or they're delusional. And you mentioned earlier, this idea, well, maybe this is too good to be true, because we're little kids, right? We think everything's possible, and we have all these great fairy tales that, and everything always works out all right in the end. And then we're told, no, that's not the way it is. It's don't
Right.
even think about it. And then we come around to where you and I are now. We realize it is magical, and everything is possible, and everything is going to be okay in the end. And then we start to question it. That little voice comes in our mind and says, but is that really true?
Right. Right. Yeah. So, so true. Yeah, I've also, another path I've taken, which they all intermingle so closely, but is shamanism.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to, in the future, I want to offer this to caretakers and parents with actual activities that they can do with their young children. And if you don't mind me just sharing just a little bit about what I'm thinking about, you guys can let me know what you think.
Yeah.
But in shamanism, which is the study of indigenous, a shaman is, a medicine man from what we would learn, but the wise man, and the person who's really in touch with the spiritual world as well as as the earthly world. And there's something in the medicine wheel, which is kind of the wheel of life. And we can all totally relate to it as you get into it. But there's one part of it that's called the Little Red Road, and or the Good Red Road. And it runs from north to south. So it's kind of like being physical in this world. So anyway, but it starts with the voice and the heart. And I think of a child and raising them with this kind of always on your mind. So the voice, it's interesting. My teacher puts the voice first. I put the heart first. People kind of decide which one they want to put first, but I put the heart first. Mm-hmm. So to me, that means celebrate your feelings, celebrate your child's feelings, the nudges, the imagination, that we really need to listen to that and not just kind of blow it off, because that's where feelings is really where the voice should come from the heart. Because when you are working with the voice, you are speaking your truth. So what is your truth? And then it goes up into creating a sacred space. And what I love about the sacred space, and that we should all once again think about and talk to our little ones about, because they know how to do it, is what is sacred? What's sacred to you? And if something is truly sacred, then that's where you should be spending a large amount of your time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what you honor. So let us all look at that. Let's all look in our hearts about that. We say something sacred, but do we really put our energy there? And we need to think about spending more of our time in those sacred, and nothing's more sacred than our kids, right? I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Our children, especially if you have children, how much time do we spend with them? How much time do we do these ritual ceremonies? So another thing to think about, feeling from your heart, trusting those feelings, then being able to voice that from the heart. So this sounds a little bit funny, but like everything that comes from your voice, let it like be an orchestra or a nice piece of music. I mean, obviously that's not going to always happen, but it coming from the heart, then creating that, really looking at what is sacred and what do you honor in your life? Once again, where are you putting you're putting your time, putting your energy, because with that comes your truth. So what is our truth? And when we really look at, these are things that we all really need to think about, because you really sit down, because we're so caught up in the day-to-day and so much going on. But what is our truth? Because being our truth is about being authentic. And in shamanism, they talk a lot about wearing all these different masks. So, you wear the mask when you're the wife, you wear a mask when you're at work, you wear you get the whole, and taking at least some of those masks off and being your authentic self. And once again, the children watching every step of the way of how we're doing that and talking about that. And usually you use stones when you're teaching children, at least I do, in terms of just learning a concept and then talking about it for a few days and holding it. And then it goes on up to wisdom. And wisdom is in the north, and the north is the beginning, and that's where the children begin. So that's where they are. That's where they're the source when they come into this world. And then they, filter around the medicine wheel. But it's to really think about those sorts of things. I know that was just a really quick like recap, but bring a ceremony or a ritual or something really, not really time consuming into a child's life, spend time with them and talk about all those different things on a regular basis. How beautiful is that for you as the person doing it, for yourself and for them to have. I mean, that's what I call love.
Yeah,
Sharing that
absolutely.
sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's you were talking earlier about your friend with going in to tell everything they did
Yeah.
wrong, and that type of religion. That is more the way that I was raised, and I
Oh,
was
wasn't?
so.
Yeah.
As you were talking about, talking to a child about what's sacred and what's divine, to tell the child themselves that you are sacred and you're divine and you come from
Exactly.
wisdom. And not to bash on any particular religion, but there are religions that tell us that we are evil, that we
Right.
are bad. And there was an example, and I've told this before, but people who haven't heard, my daughter was in Sunday school at the church we were going to, and they had her do an exercise, and that white on one side of the paper and that black on the other side of the paper. And they said the white represents God because God is good and pure and everything, and the black represents you because you're a sinner. And that is kind of that's the message that some children, not all, get in our society. And not too long after that, we took our daughter out of that church.
Right.
But the thing is that this thing you're talking about, it is beautiful, and that's what the indigenous people around the world have known for years. And as we in the West are kind of rediscovering and going, wow, isn't this really cool? It's like, yeah, we're just kind of coming back around to where we were supposed to be in the first place.
So true. Learning so much from them and so much wisdom there. Yeah, so important.
There is, and it's really interesting. Last night I was speaking with a young woman who's gone through a tough time. Her mother had passed away, and she was like, and we were talking about the like two sides of the same coin because she was raised as a strict atheist, so there is nothing after this. This is all there is. Blah blah blah. And then when her mother passed, it's like, okay, there's got to be something more. And her eyes are being opened up. But then on the other one hand, religion's telling us not to trust ourselves, but on the other hand, our materialist society is telling us don't trust ourselves either.
Exactly.
There's nothing else out there. It's all wishful thinking. Just listen to us. Accept the reality that you're an accident. That you're only going to be here for a short time. You turn on like a light bulb and you turn off like a light bulb. And I just, as I was speaking with this person, I was like, I just see the damage being done from both sides. But it was so beautiful watching her eyes starting to open up, and as she's discovering things and researching and listening to NDE stories, and like she was just lighting up as we were talking.
The
To have someone that,
NDE stories,
yeah,
they are just, you listen to so many of them and they're just irrefutable. And I love listening to the researchers who have interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of these people. And I don't know about you, but most of them have ended up very teary,
mm-hmm.
reliving some of those, even though they themselves have not had a near-death experience. They're just, and the near-death experiences of children and the pictures that they draw and what they talk about. Oh wow, I just love this.
Well, you
And
mentioned,
I know what I wanted to say something quickly.
sure.
So I've asked a few people this on my podcast, but I've said, so this news is so exciting. I mean, what? This is, so one of the guys who started, I'm sure he's not watching my interview, but he really thought that this knowing that we have now, he thought it was going to become bigger than any religion that's ever been. Once again, not saying any names, but so I was saying, why isn't everybody so excited about this? And one of the answers was, I think people have just lost hope. They're just so tired of being hopeful and then it not being true in our leaders, in our whatever it may be, and it just broke my heart that many just aren't hopeful. They just don't want to be hurt again. Now, on the other hand, I think that, who was it? Someone said either spiritually lazy or academically ignorant. I think that was Mary Neal who said that, No, and ignorant is not a bad word. It's just not doing the research and not being interested. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, I think about this too. Human nature is, because we're biological animals, right? We are evolved to a certain thing. Human nature is just like in the animal kingdom. We do what works until it doesn't work anymore, and that's actually efficient, right? Why would we change doing something that, because it requires effort to change? So why would we change doing something until it doesn't work anymore? So that's why I think, and as I talk to people, there's usually some catalyst that comes along in your life that kind of snaps you out of this. Until then, you're Neo in the Matrix. You're going along, you're living your life day to day, you're doing the drudgery, and you don't question it because you don't think there's anything better out there. And you don't question it until something comes along and says, okay, there must be something better. And I blame our society for a lot of it. As you said, there is that disappointment in the leaders. There's disappointment in religion. People grow up in a church and they're told these things and they're told to believe these things literally, and they get to be adults and they're told Santa Claus isn't real, and they say, well, if Santa Claus is not real, then must not be real either. So I'm just done with the whole thing.
Exactly.
And so, as I said, I've talked to people who are hardcore atheists, they call themselves atheists. I would call them materialists, where it's like there's nothing other than what I can see in front of my eyes. And then, like as you were saying earlier, once we get caught onto this, they come. They're so excited. They're like, there's so much out there. This is going to change the world. And I'm like, I wish and I hope, and that's my mission, and that's why I do what I do. But this has been out there for a lot, for
it
forever.
Has.
We're just happen to come across it now, and through the power of the internet, which allows us to share these stories and be in community, and people like you and I can talk to people who are like us, because otherwise we wouldn't. We'd feel isolated. So now we feel more emboldened to go out and tell people our experiences. If you've had a near-death experience, or you've had a sign like I've had, like the ones that you have had that have been pretty much miraculous.
Yeah.
And undeniable. So some people say we're turning the corner. I hope it's true. I really do. And I'm doing everything I can to make sure that we do.
Yeah, you're doing such an amazing job. I just love listening to all your different interviews. I really think that there is a transformation happening. I think that things have gotten so, it's just, something's got to change. And you are right. It's kind of like, this is sort of new to me. Well, it's very new to me, to be quite honest. I mean, almost 5 years, and it's been around for a long time. But I've just interviewed some people as you have, who've been down this road for a long, 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 long time. And they really think it's different now. And I tell you why I think it's different, because science is believing it. I mean, not the materialists, of course, but so many. That's why I love listening to these doctors and PhDs and these hardcore materialists who've had these experiences, and it has transformed their lives. And now, with all of the brain scans and all of the, oh my gosh, all the different things that they're doing, I do think that it's changing. I hope, and it will never be. We will always have duality. We're always going to have that. That's why we're here, to learn those lessons. But I'm like you. I have hope, and I just want to plant a seed. Be a little bit of a messenger, and help all those millennials really get it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I try to be realistic and skeptical, but remain optimistic at the same time. So when I hear about this shift, and then some people say, "Oh, it's going to happen overnight," we're going to move into the fifth dimension. It's going to happen on December 21st, and I heard about the rapture when I was growing up too, and so I'm not. I don't think there's going to be a rapid shift like that. But on the other hand, I look at evolution. And so evolution, we think it's what's this natural, slow, steady state from this state to this state, but that's not how evolution works. It's actually what they call punctuated equilibrium. So things go along the same for a while, and then something happens, and there's a major shift.
Right.
And I think where I'm agreeing with what you're saying is when things get so bad that this way is not working anymore, that's when we change. So when we look around the world and we look at what's going on with politics, and we look at what's going on with the economy, and we look at what's going on right now with healthcare, with COVID and stuff,
Climate.
and climate, so that's when people shift. It's like when we feel like we have to, when this way isn't working anymore. And the saying "it's always darkest before the dawn" is absolutely true. We
Yeah.
That's how humans are built. And I've heard people say, "Why did I have to go through this painful thing to make this shift? Why did my child have to transition? Why did my mother have to transition? Why did I have to, be in an accident or get cancer?" And I'm like, that's human nature. That's not a bad thing. That's how we are. That's how we're built. And then we need these things to kind of to wake us up.
And I believe, or I have a knowing that we do plan this life before we come here, and we plan the lessons that we want to learn. And as difficult as that is for people to accept, it's really, in my opinion, there can't be, the whole universe is so symmetrical in terms of, I'm not talking about humans, but in terms of nature and just all of it. So there's an order.
Mm-hmm.
There's an order. How can the human life be random?
Right.
It can't. There's no room for and if it is random, what's the point? what's the point? There are a couple of really good interviews out about that, but that we do plan our lessons, and that we do have a time when there are two things that are set for sure, is when we come into this earth and when we leave this earth. And there may be a few different exit points or scenarios for when we do leave this earth, but I believe that with all my heart. And I just don't believe that there's randomness. And as many as have said after they had a profound near-death experience, that as hard as this is to hear, but beauty comes from everything.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about the universe being random, if you look at nature, look at the diversity of nature. You look at the human body, which I'm just fascinated that we function at all, because the body is so complex. So on the one hand, it appears to be random, but on the other hand, there are these self-organizing principles that allowed this life to come together. And there was a guy I read many years ago, because I said I was a fundamentalist Christian at one time, so I started reading books by Christians to try to get myself out of that. And the guy's name was, I think it's Hugo Ross, and he was a what do you call the guys that do
cosmologist, I think. Yeah.
So he was writing about the chances of life existing on Earth, and how fine, or in the universe at all, and how fine-tuned it had to be. And if this one constant was off by this amount, that life wouldn't exist. And you add up all these constants together that are precisely tuned, and there's a theory that says that, the universe was tuned for life. It's like, there's an old thing that, how can there be a watch if there wasn't a watchmaker? If you're walking along the beach and you find a watch, you assume someone made that watch. You don't assume that random forces brought it together. So there is something fascinating about the way the universe does self-organize. And then when we start getting into quantum physics and quantum mechanics, that blew scientists' mind, because they're like, well, we don't know what consciousness is. There's probably no such thing. It's probably just an illusion. And then they said, well, wait a minute. If we use this experiment, if we observe it, it acts this way. If we don't observe it, it acts that way. So not only does it prove there's consciousness, but consciousness has an impact on the material. And then no one understands how that works. So
I think another really important area of study is psychedelics. I've been researching a lot about psychedelics, because I think they're going to change the world. And I don't know I think it's cool that I talk about this, but there's a documentary called Fabulous Fungi. And it's just plants. It's just plants, but the research that's going on at Johns Hopkins and University of Penn. I'm not talking about psychedelics that people used to. I never did that, but I did other things.
Yeah.
This is not a rock and roll thing, but the way helping veterans with PTSD, the anxiety, the stress, the pharmaceuticals, the drugs, something that can help a person really transform. And anyway, the research is just that's coming out right now is just so promising. And I think there's a reason, once again, I just trust that there's a reason all these NDE stories are just other than just the internet and all these, I hate to say credible people, because I think everyone is credible in their own right, but the physicians, this and that, and all of this research on not only psychedelics, but on meditative practice, on holotropic breathing, on how we can get back to that source. I guess that's my point. Back to that inner child, back to that spiritual, that invisible, that our materialistic minds just can't go to. But there seems to be this universal force that's bringing all of these things in, that's just kind of nudging us, nudging us along. So I have a lot of, and the meditate, everyone meditating so much now and all of that. So I have a lot of hope there too.
Yeah, I do, and it's interesting to see for me as a scientist, chemical engineer is my background,
right?
And so I was the one to know, like, what's the answer? How does this work, right? So that I was when I was a child, I used to take things apart, and it's great because I have studied religion, I've studied philosophy, and now science. They're kind of coming to some of the same conclusions, and it's like you're coming from two different directions but to the same conclusion. And I'm starting to see this a little bit where they're not fighting each other, where they say religion is a separate field of study or consciousness, I would like to say, or spirituality is a separate field of study from the physical. These are two branches of the same thing. These are two sides of the same coin. And a thing I say to people, I hate the word supernatural.
Yeah.
I don't believe in the supernatural. I believe everything is natural. There's some things that we don't understand, and we call it supernatural. So, radio waves a few years ago would have been supernatural. Bluetooth technology on my phone would have been considered supernatural. Someone said you could have a wireless network between your phone and your headphones. You would say that's crazy. There's no such thing. The first guy that discovered germs, he said, let's wash our hands before we do surgery. I think he ended up in a mental institution because they're like, this is not possible. There are no little invisible things called germs, guy. So as spiritual people right now, they're looking at us saying, because science says, well, we don't know how that works. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know where it is. We can't cut you open and find it in the body. So therefore, it must not exist. Or if it is there, then it must be have risen out of the body. So when the body dies, it stops. It stops. So that's their mindset. So they say, you're crazy if you believe anything else. But all this evidence is coming out now proving they're wrong.
Right. Because isn't it interesting that I remember a very well-known scientist that is not a materialist anymore. He said, but not understanding something, that is why we have science. Right. That's, to take the things that we don't understand and figure it out and do all this research and do all of this. But that's not what is happening in the materialist world. But I think, I don't, someone said that there was a study done and 50% plus of physicians now really do believe that there is a continuity of consciousness, that, well, maybe not continuity, but it is separate from the brain. So, and it was a reputable source. So it's, even though numbers, I'm always a little bit hesitant about, but so we'll see.
Yeah, I think they're getting there, and as more get there, it gives other people permission to get there, and right. There is some scientific study now of consciousness, and to be fair to the scientists, it's easier to study how electrons work than how consciousness works, because you can't set up an experiment in a lab. And that's one thing about consciousness, especially like with near-death experiences, for example. You can't experiment with that. You know, you can
Right.
study the data, but you can't bring somebody in and kill them and see what happens to them. So we're finding now, as our instruments get better and as our experiments get better, and everybody refers to the double slit experiment, but now that we have that technology and we can do that, because there was a debate for many, many years, is light a particle or is light a wave? And because obviously it can't be both, but it actually is. And it changes depending on how you look at it. And that's a mind-blowing thing, but that's been proven time and time again through, various experiments, and also showing that consciousness can work backwards in time, which really freaks people out.
Right, right.
So,
I find it interesting too. Is it William Schaffner who just went to the moon?
yeah, William
Or
Shatner just went up in space. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And listening to him, and I can't remember which astronaut, you probably know, that went into space and then came back and started the Institute of Noetic Sciences.
Yes.
But that they do these things which are also going to be becoming much more prominent before we know it, and they just cry when they talk about it, because they just know that there's so much more, so much, and that's pretty exciting too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Marla, we're getting to the end of our time. I could talk to you all day. So I'm just looking at the clock. It's like we should probably wrap up.
Yeah.
I really appreciate having you here. Really enjoy the conversation. Tell people where they can reach you and how they can find out more about you.
Yes. Well, you go to my website, interviewswithinnocence.com, and you can email me through the website, or at Marla Hughes 116 at gmail.com. And yeah, my book is called Love Magic, and it's on Amazon. And you probably need to put by Marla Hughes because it just went out. It's Hughes, and it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to find. So.
Yeah, the book looks beautiful. I think it'd be a great gift to give to someone with children, and to start to introduce these concepts that they already know, but to
Yeah.
keep them from losing these concepts as they get older, to say, hey, it's okay to think this way. I love it.
Right. Well, thank you. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, Marla, it's been great having you here.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been an honor, and happy late Thanksgiving. Sounds
All
like you
right.
had a good one.
Enjoy the
Thank
rest of your
you.
day.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Don't forget to hit that big red subscribe button, and click the notify bell. Thanks for being here.